And thank you to all of you gathered here today. This is an unusual scene for me. I almost never speak to crowds in downtown Toronto or anywhere close to Bay Street. And so this will be a novel experience, and if I'm off the normal script, please bear with me. But it is nevertheless an important time for us to be here. And the reason I accepted this invitation, which again is very unusual for me, is because of the important research that Bill has been publishing that demonstrates in numbers what I have been seeing in real-life stories ever since I launched my campaign to become Prime Minister of Canada. And these stories need to be told because after 8 years of Trudeau, life is increasingly a living hell for the working class people of this country. Now, often people hear these sorts of statements in rooms like this and they think it is hyperbole. And that is one of the fundamental problems with our country today, is that there is a group of people who do not experience the misery and the suffering that the everyday Canadian is living on the ground. And as a result, when they hear me talk about it, they have a hard time appreciating and understanding it. Now, we have the numbers to prove it. But let's talk about what life is like for the ordinary Canadian today. Housing costs have literally doubled in the last 8 years. Rent has gone from, on average, about $900 to roughly $2,000. That has meant that we have now regular situations where these are not anomalies anymore, where 5 or 6 people are crammed into one-bedroom apartments. When I was at the Oshawa Food Bank, they told me they have crammed 16 middle-class seniors into a 4-bedroom home because they've all lost their homes. We have 2 million people lined up at food banks in a month in Canada. If you look at the bread lines that go around street corners and you put them in black and white, you could be forgiven if you thought that these were images from the Great Depression. You look at the tent cities. These were unheard of 8 years ago. There are 30 homeless encampments in Halifax. 30. And they are not just filled with people who are down on their luck, who have had a hard time pulling their lives together. Increasingly, they are filled with middle-class people. In Penticton, there's a phenomenon of seniors, middle-class seniors, some of them pensioned, who live in parking lots. We have nurses and carpenters who live in their cars. And you can understand why. Let's just look at the numbers. RBC publishes a housing affordability report, which compares the share of median monthly income you would be required to spend to own the average home in your locality. In Vancouver, it's over 100%. Think about that. If you took all of your pre-tax income and spent it on your housing costs, if you didn't eat, recreate, or even clothe yourself, and you evaded all of your taxes, you still wouldn't be able to make your mortgage payment on the average home in Vancouver. This is not normal. And, frankly, we've got to stop making excuses for ourselves. We like to think that there's some global phenomenon to blame. No. Our housing bubble is near the worst in the world. UBS says that that Toronto is the most dangerous housing bubble on planet Earth. Demographia, which compares median income to median house price, says that Vancouver is the 3rd most overpriced housing market on Earth. IMF says that we have the most dangerous mortgage debt in the entire OECD. This is not a global phenomenon for which we are simply the helpless victims. And it is certainly not the result of geography, because we have the most land per capita by far of any G7 country. Housing should be dirt cheap because we have the most dirt, right? But it's not cheap. These are all the results of government decisions that caused this misery. We have, let's discuss how this happened. Our Prime Minister today, you know, people try to describe him by his ideology. First of all, we have to understand is that Justin Trudeau is not a Liberal. There used to be a common sense consensus among Conservatives and Liberals in this country, whether it was John Manley or Paul Martin or Jean Chrétien, Brian Mulroney, Stephen Harper, a common sense consensus that you needed to balance budgets, rely mostly on free markets for economic activity, free trade, live within your means, have the government focus on its core responsibilities, helping those who couldn't help themselves, build roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, etc. But that we should live within our means so that everyone else could get ahead. This Prime Minister does not believe that. He is a radical departure from that common sense, liberal, conservative consensus that gave us 25 years of prosperity from 1984 to 2015. He is not a liberal. He is deeply illiberal. He believes in only two things. One, that the government should control everything, and two, that he should control the government. And he's only prepared to compromise on the first principle if the second principle is in some way at risk. And that is what we have seen in his economic policies. Now, make no mistake, he is not anti-business. He's not against capitalism. There's a misunderstanding here. He is in favor of capitalism that is run by the government. If you want to make a profit, he has no problem with that, as long as you get it from a government favor. Whether it's a monstrous subsidy, some sort of regulatory protection. Let me give you an example. He's blocked 3 pipelines, but he's bought one too. What's the commonality there? Well, he's okay with a pipeline as long as it's controlled by the state. He's raised taxes on businesses, but that doesn't make him anti-business because he's giving tens of billions of dollars of corporate subsidies to other businesses. This is the philosophy of the state controlling everything. Now, here's the problem with state capitalism versus free enterprise capitalism. In state capitalism, you get ahead by having the best lobbyist. In free enterprise capitalism, you get ahead by having the best product. In state capitalism, you make profit by pleasing politicians. In free enterprise capitalism, you get ahead by pleasing customers. You know, our friends on the other side of this debate often say they have a lot of empathy. Well, what is empathy? It's seeing through someone else's eyes. In the free enterprise system, a business must be empathetic, must see what its customers want. If you want to sell what John Smith buys, you have to see through John Smith's eyes. In a capitalist, a free enterprise system, businesses have to fight tooth and nail to please customers and to attract the best workers. But in a state-controlled system, what they have to do is please the decision makers in power. And they have. And so many of them have done quite well by concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands of the politically influential. We've often heard criticisms that Mr. Trudeau likes to redistribute wealth. And he does. But he has not redistributed it to the poor. He's concentrated it, actually. The working people of this country have never been worse off. And those with political influence have never been better off. And so what are the consequences of this? Today, after 8 years of Trudeau, we have a smaller economy than we did on a per capita basis than we did 5 years ago. I don't know if at any time, Bill, since the 1930s that has actually happened. We've now had 5 consecutive quarters of the GDP per capita shrinking in this country. And this is the necessary consequence of a policy that has the government controlling all the levers of the economy rather than allowing the free enterprise system and the voluntary exchange of work for wages, product for payment, and investment for interest to prevail. But the good news is that life wasn't like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like this after he's gone. We're going to replace the hurt that he has caused with the hope that Canadians need. And we're going to do it based on the common sense Canadian consensus that made this the best country anywhere on earth and will once again do the same for generations to come. Thank you. I consider myself very blessed to come from this country. I was born to a 16-year-old unwed mother who put me up for adoption to 2 school teachers. And they taught me that in Canada, it didn't matter where you came from. It mattered where you were going. It didn't matter who you knew. It mattered what you could do. That's the country my wife came to as a refugee. It's the country we want for our kids and yours. And to restore that country, we need to unleash the unmatched power of free people generating the future through their own hard work and through limited constraints from the state. And that's the kind of economy that we're going to create. So let's go through the plan. First and foremost, common sense Conservatives will axe the carbon tax. I know that's not a popular position on Bay Street, where there have been many corporations who've published reports favoring carbon taxes. And of course, we don't see any surprise in that. Of course, those who don't have to worry about paying the tax are happy to put those taxes on the working class. But my purpose is to make everyday consumers and workers better off. So we will be axing the tax, and the next election will be a carbon tax election on whether or not we quadruple the tax to 61 cents a litre, as Singh and Trudeau propose, or whether we axe the tax and instead use technology to fight climate change and protect the environment. Secondly, we're going to bring home common sense to our finances once again. And that includes both fiscal and monetary policy. The staggering increase in the size and cost of government over the last 8 years is what has led to the inflation that has been domestically produced, the homegrown inflation that we've suffered here in this country. The cost of government is up 65% in 8 years. In fact, we've created $600 billion of cash in the last 3 years. That is a 32% increase in the M2 money supply, coins, bills, and bank deposits, during which time the real economy grew by 4%. So money supply grew 8 times faster than the stuff that money buys. It's very simple. If your economy has 10 apples and $10, it's $1 an apple. If you double the number of dollars to 20, but you still have 10 apples, it's $2 an apple. You don't get richer just because you create more cash. Cash is really just the technology by which we transfer value over space and time. So when you bring in inflation, you muck up that technology. It's like moving the antenna on those old television screens. The screen gets all staticky. It breaks down the relationship between lender and borrower, buyer and seller. And as a result, everything breaks down in the economy and interest rates have to go up. This was obviously predictable. Unfortunately, too many in the economic consensus forgot very recent history, that when we tried this experiment in the 1970s, we got runaway inflation, but somehow we were convinced that for the first time in history, we could print money without causing inflation. I mean, it is astonishing how quickly we forget. As Kipling said, just as the dog returns to its vomit and the sow returns to her mire, the burned fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. But my government is going to bring back sound money. We're going to get the Bank of Canada back to its core mandate, which is to protect the purchasing power of our money through low and stable inflation, not to print cash and call it quantitative easing. You know, one of these words we use, these fancy words that no one can understand. When I described it to my constituents, truck drivers and farmers told me back in 2020 that this was obviously going to lead to inflation. And yet all of the experts told us that no, it would be consequence-free. Of course it's not consequence-free, and it should never be allowed to happen again. So we will restore sound money. The inflation, though, is actually only a symptom. The disease is overspending. So how are we going to get the spending under control? First of all, I've already announced billions of dollars in savings. We'll get rid of the $54 million ArriveCan app. We'll get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank, which creates massive moral hazards by granting enormous loan guarantees for large construction contracts that take the risk off the builder and the investor and put it onto the taxpayer, fundamentally deranging the free enterprise principle of that risk and reward should be married. This program has not completed a single project, and yet they've paid bonuses to their executives. It will be gone when I'm Prime Minister. The $1 billion green slush fund will be gone. We will go line by line to find other savings, and we will bring in a dollar-for-dollar law that requires my government find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending. This is important because, as the great economist Thomas Sowell said, the first principle of economics is scarcity. People always want more than there is to have. And the first principle of politics is to ignore the first rule of economics. Politicians are the only creatures in the universe that don't live with scarcity. The birds and the trees, the fish in the seas have to maximize use of scarce resources. So do single moms and small business owners. But politicians always externalize their scarcity by passing it on in more debt, more inflation, and more taxes. I'm going to require that every time a minister brings a memorandum to cabinet seeking more money, they have to find the money in their department to pay for it. And, if you want a new deck in suburban Canada, you skip your vacation, or you get a bargain on both. In the bureaucracy, there is literally no incentive for that. The incentive actually is to make it more expensive, because then you'll have more happy bureaucrats working under you, more happy contractors getting paid, and more empire all around you. The only way to fix that flaw, that government failure, is to internalize the scarcity and require that politicians make the same trade-offs that everyday Canadians make every day in their lives. And doing that, we will balance the budget, and we will end the necessity for all this money printing. We will also get the Bank of Canada back to its core mandate. We will ensure that there is no central bank digital currency. We do not want people depositing their money into government bank accounts, and we do not want to make it easier to politicize money creation for vote buying or to favor one group or another. The Bank of Canada will have one job, and that is sound money. We will also make this, instead of creating more cash, we're going to create more of what cash buys. So how do we do that? One, we've got to start to reward work again. C.D. Howe has done excellent calculations on how much money you lose of every extra dollar you earn. So a single mom in Ontario earning 60 grand goes out and earns another dollar. She loses 80 cents in clawbacks of her child benefit, income tax, payroll tax, and other taxes. So she's making 25 bucks an hour. On another hour of work, she takes home $5, way below the minimum wage. And we wonder why we have a labor shortage. When we punish something, we get less of it. Therefore, we want more work. We have to make work pay. And a Poilievre-led government will reform the clawbacks and cut income taxes so people bring home more of each dollar they earn, and hard work actually pays off. Thank you. And speaking of work, we're going to end the war on work. Our immigrants, for example. We have 20,000 immigrants who are doctors that can't work in Canada. 32,000 immigrant nurses that cannot work in Canada because they cannot get licensed to practice. So I was at an eye clinic in Ottawa 3 months ago, and there's a guy working there as a technician. He makes the equivalent of about $70,000 a year for his work. He commutes to Abu Dhabi, where he does eye surgeries. He's a doctor in Abu Dhabi today, and he's a technician in Canada. He has families in Canada, or else he'd just leave altogether. 85% of Filipino nurses can't work as nurses in Canada. In the States, they can take an international nursing exam and get to work within 2 weeks. And here, we deprive us of nurses and them of paychecks. 70 years ago, the federal government led the charge and brought the provinces together on a Red Seal certification for the licensed trades. So now we have one standard for each regulated trade. You take the test, you get your Red Seal, you can work anywhere in Canada. We have no such thing for the professions. A common sense conservative government will bring in a blue seal that we will work with the province, and we will leverage federal money to get them to sign on so that an immigrant doctor or nurse can write an exam and get to work within 60 days anywhere in Canada. And we're going to unleash paychecks in our resource sector. Where it doesn't matter if your name is Martin or Mohammed, Singh or Smith, Poilievre or Patel, if you're prepared to work hard